It's quite interesting to watch what the unconscious is doing with the fact that it is apparently threatened with a complete end. It disregards it. Life behaves as if it were going on.
Have you ever felt like the ground simply disappeared beneath your feet? As if the world kept spinning, people continued with their routines. But you were trapped in a deafening silence, as if something inside you had died along with the one who left. No one prepares you for this. No one teaches you that grief is not just sadness. It is confusion. It is anger. It is guilt. It is the collapse of what you believed you were. Carl Jung said that the most important experiences in life are not chosen by us. They choose us. And grief is one of them. For Jung, death does not merely represent the end of a life, but the beginning of a profound symbolic process. The loss of someone can activate powerful archetypes within the psyche, leading the soul down a path that, although painful, carries within it the possibility of rebirth. Grief, when experienced with awareness, does not just wound, it transforms. It invites us to a forced pause, a moment where certainties dissolve and, in their place, questions arise that we would never have asked in times of stability. This state of suspension between who we were and who we are not yet is fertile. It is there that the psyche begins to work, silently reorganizing meanings, seeking sense, preparing the ground for a new way of being. Most people will tell you to move on, to occupy your mind, to be strong. But the truth is that ignoring the pain only feeds the emptiness. Jung did not believe in numbing suffering. He believed in going through it, because it is in this process that you find something that has been lost for a long time: yourself. And if you are here, listening to this, it is because you may have already felt that call. Perhaps you have already dreamed of the one who left. You may have felt a presence in the silence. You may have wondered if there is something beyond the pain, some meaning, some purpose. This video is an invitation, not to escape the pain, but to dive into it with awareness, because only those who have the courage to traverse the dark night of the soul find the light that does not come from outside, but from within. If you are ready to face what grief really means, not as an end, but as the beginning of an inner journey, then keep watching, because what you will discover here can transform your relationship with loss, with life, and with yourself. When Carl Jung wrote the Red Book, he was not just formulating a new psychological theory. He was trying not to go insane. He was trying to survive an internal collapse so deep that it almost consumed him completely. After breaking with Freud and witnessing his inner life fragment, Jung voluntarily plunged into a state of confrontation with the unconscious, a process he described as his dark night of the soul. During this period, he did not seek rational answers, but allowed himself to listen to what emerged from the psychic depths, even when those images seemed chaotic, violent, or absurd. And it was in this dive, in this surrender to the unknown, that he understood something essential. Certain pains do not come to be avoided. They come to radically transform us. Grief, from this perspective, is not an emotional accident or an isolated event. It is a symbolic crossing of the soul, a rite of passage that tears us from our previous state of consciousness and hurls us into a new psychic configuration. When we lose someone we deeply love, we do not just lose the person themselves, we also lose the psychic representations they held within us. We lose the symbolic ground. Sometimes that person was the pillar of security, the emotional anchor, the reflection of our childhood, or even the envisioned future we had idealized. Grief deconstructs these foundations, revealing not only the emptiness of absence, but the internal collapse of everything that was unconsciously supported by that bond. And it is precisely in this abyss that transformation begins. An abyss that, although painful and often frightening, is also a portal. Jung believed that intense suffering opens cracks in the ego, and it is through these cracks that the self, the deepest and total instance of the psyche, can finally emerge. Pain, in this sense, is an alchemical agent. It dissolves the old forms of the self, unravels rigid narratives, and pushes the individual toward a new way of being. Like in ancient mythologies, where the hero descends into the underworld to face monsters and returns transformed, the grieving person, if they have the courage to remain conscious within the pain, undergoes an initiatory journey. They die to what they were and are reborn as something truer, more whole, more real. Death, as an archetype, has a psychic function. It represents the breaking of cycles, the interruption of patterns, the end of internal structures that no longer serve the evolution of the soul. And grief, as a manifestation of this symbolic death, is the process that reorganizes the psyche from this break. Emotional disorganization, helplessness, the feeling of losing meaning, all of this is part of a deep dynamic that is in motion within us. The soul is trying to heal, but for that, it first needs to dismantle itself. That is why Jung did not see grief as pathology. He recognized it as a sacred moment, an inevitable stage in the journey of individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are. But this process requires something that our modern culture has unlearned: presence, silence, listening. Not the listening from the outside, but the internal listening that connects us with what is most authentic and, often, most painful within us. Fleeing from grief is like interrupting a spiritual birth. It is wanting to leave the cave before the eyes adjust to the darkness. It is refusing to be born again. And every refusal of transformation comes at a price. Either the suffering is somatized, or it repeats itself disguised in other relationships, in other cycles of loss, in other voids. But what happens when we try to resist this process? When we cannot bear to lose control and seek to rationalize or suppress the pain? In the next part, we will dive precisely into this point: the illusion of control, and how the unconscious responds to this attempt at denial. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. We live in an era that idolizes control. From an early age, we are conditioned to organize, plan, manage, and anticipate. We believe that if we try hard enough, we can manage not only our commitments, but also our emotions, our relationships, and even the course of our existence. Culture teaches us that vulnerability is weakness, and that feeling too much is a kind of deviation from the norm. We create routines, lists, methods, and distractions to protect ourselves from the unpredictable. But then comes death, that silent presence, which does not ask for permission, which does not respect schedules, which arrives with the coldness of absolute events. And with it, everything that seemed solid collapses. Death destroys the illusion of control with surgical precision, and when it arrives, it brings with it a devastating revelation. We are radically powerless in the face of certain forces of life. No matter how much we prepare, no matter how hard we try to keep everything under control, there are events that bring us to our knees. For Jung, this collapse of the ego is not a mistake to be corrected. It is a calling, a forced invitation, yes, but deeply necessary for us to connect with what truly governs our lives, the unconscious. During mourning, the unconscious ceases to be a silent backdrop and becomes the protagonist. The rational structure that once organized our experience is weakened. And it is in this space of fragility that previously repressed content begins to emerge forcefully. Intense dreams, memories that seemed forgotten, disproportionate emotional impulses, nameless anxieties. All of this is the language of the soul trying to be heard, and it does not speak in logical sentences. It speaks in symbols, images, sensations. If we try to suffocate or rationalize this movement, we are resisting the very process of healing. Jung taught that the unconscious is wiser than the ego, although its wisdom does not follow common logic. It is not an enemy. It is a partner. Mysterious, yes, often frightening, but essential for the psyche to become more whole. And mourning, with its archetypal weight, is one of the most fertile situations for this dialogue to occur. Therefore, the emotions that arise during this period, anger, guilt, fear, deep sadness, should not be controlled or judged. They are messages. They are signs that something very important is trying to reorganize itself within us. However, we have been taught to resist, to be strong, to move on as quickly as possible. The performance culture has turned even mourning into a goal to be achieved, a symbolic deadline to return to normalcy. And so, we push the pain into the depths of the unconscious, along with everything it carries and could reveal to us. But repressed pain does not disappear. It transforms into symptoms, emotional blockages, and patterns of repetition that trap us in silent cycles of suffering. What we avoid now manifests later, with more intensity and less clarity. That is why Jung saw dreams as precious allies in this process. When the ego can no longer bear the weight of experience, the unconscious comes into play with its symbolic language. Dreams become channels of psychic elaboration, where what is unbearable in reality can be slowly digested in layers through images that carry deep meanings. In mourning, these dreams not only process the loss, they often offer comfort, closure, and even reconnection with those who have passed, in a symbolic dimension that challenges common logic, but resonates with a deep emotional truth. And that is what we will talk about in the next part: how dreams become messengers of the soul in times of loss, and how in them we can archetypally and transformatively reconnect with those who have departed. For Carl Jung, dreams are not mere random discharges of a tired mind. They are authentic expressions of the soul, symbolic attempts by the unconscious to communicate something that consciousness has not yet been able to articulate in words. And when grief sets in, when pain tears apart the fabric of everyday reality and dismantles the internal structures that supported our identity, dreams intensify. They become more vivid, stranger, more insistent, not by chance. It is because, at this moment, the psyche is desperately trying to restore the psychic balance disrupted by loss. It seeks, through dream images, to continue an interrupted dialogue with the meaning of life and death. Jung observed this deeply in his work, The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, as well as in his psychological commentary on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He viewed death as a symbolic transition, both for those who depart and for those who remain. In this context, dreams become the arena where this transition is elaborated. Dreaming of the deceased, for example, is not just nostalgia. It is an attempt by the psyche to symbolize the continuity of the relationship in a new form. The figure of the dead in the dream is not the literal deceased, but an archetype in transformation. It may appear as a guide, a shadow, a messenger, or even an accuser. Each appearance carries a profound meaning and should never be dismissed as mere nostalgia. During grief, it is common for the unconscious to summon intense images. Cemeteries, dark oceans, old houses, silent animals, distant voices. These images do not arise by chance. They are the symbols that the soul uses to process the loss. Jung believed that symbols are not meant to be explained, but experienced. They carry multiple meanings, and their impact lies precisely in what we cannot fully translate. When you dream of a presence watching you, or a door slowly closing, or someone saying something incomprehensible, pay attention. The unconscious is trying to show you what consciousness cannot yet bear to face directly. There is also a more subtle and powerful detail. Often, dreams reveal unresolved aspects of the relationship with the departed. Poorly processed conflicts, unspoken words, repressed feelings. In these cases, the deceased may appear not as a source of comfort, but as a call for forgiveness, understanding, and reconciliation with parts of yourself that were projected onto that relationship. Grief then also transforms into a journey of psychic reintegration. Because deep down, all the pain we feel from the loss of another is also the pain of losing a part of ourselves. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung recounts how dreams helped him navigate the death of his wife, Emma. He didn't limit himself to feeling her absence, he engaged in dialogue with her through symbols. Death didn't sever the bond, it merely transformed it. And it was in dreams that this new type of bond could manifest. This type of experience is not exclusive to Jung. Many people report having dreams of loved ones that feel more real than waking life. And in these dreams, they feel love, guidance, even relief. They are not illusions. They are symbolic manifestations of a connection that has migrated from the material to the mystery. But for these dreams to bear fruit, listening is required. Symbolic humility is necessary. It is not about interpreting hastily, but about allowing oneself to be affected by the images. Writing them down, reflecting, observing patterns, letting the unconscious speak without trying to dominate its language. Because in grief, healing does not come from logic. It comes from silence, from the symbol, from the image that visits us at night and forces us to feel what we avoid during the day. And it is precisely in this fertile and dangerous ground that something even deeper begins to emerge. The shadow. Because when we are vulnerable, when pain lays bare our defenses, what we have always tried to avoid within ourselves finally finds a way through. And it is in this encounter with the part of ourselves that we deny, hide, and even fear, that grief transforms into a mirror of the soul. In the next part, we will dive into this inevitable confrontation, the encounter with the shadow. Grief has the strange power to strip us bare. It tears us away from commitments, social masks, and the distractions of everyday life, and confronts us with who we really are when everything crumbles. It is at this moment that the shadow begins to manifest more intensely. For Jung, the shadow is the collection of everything we repress or deny within ourselves: unacceptable emotions, condemned impulses, truths we prefer not to see. During ordinary life, it remains hidden, operating in the background, projecting itself onto others. But in grief, when the structure of the ego is weakened, it rises to the surface. The pain of loss comes not only from the absence of the other, but from what that absence unearths within us. Suddenly, Feelings that seem out of place arise. Anger towards the deceased, guilt for something that was said or not said, envy of those who are not suffering, resentment against God, against life, against oneself. Many try to stifle these feelings, ashamed for not conforming to the acceptable image of someone in mourning. But Jung warned, what you do not accept in yourself controls you. And in grief, this dynamic intensifies. Ignoring the shadow is to hand it the silent control of your psyche. Grief forces us to confront our powerlessness. It reveals how much we depended on the presence of the other to sustain our identity. Often, only in the emptiness do we realize that the person filled a space that is now bare, and what remains is us with our gaping voids. It is in this emptiness that the shadow whispers, "Look at what you have always avoided." Perhaps it is your own loneliness, perhaps a childlike fear of abandonment. Perhaps it is the realization that without that relationship you now need to reinvent yourself. The shadow brings harsh but necessary truths, and denying it is to waste the chance to integrate deep and forgotten aspects of oneself. This journey, however, is not a path of destruction. It is one of reconstruction. Jung did not see the shadow as an enemy, but as a portal. Confronting the shadow is the beginning of true individuation. It is when we cease to be merely what the world expected us to be and begin to discover who we truly are. Grief, as brutal as it may seem, offers this opportunity. It does deconstruct, yes, but it also reveals. And what it reveals may be the key to a new way of living. It is not easy. The ego will resist. It will try to rationalize, distract itself, anesthetize itself. But if you have the courage to remain in the discomfort, to listen to what the shadow wants to show, something within you will begin to change. A new center forms, more authentic, stronger, freer. And it is at this point when the pain is no longer just pain, but also revelation, that psychic rebirth becomes possible. In the next part, we will explore this turning point, when grief ceases to be merely suffering and begins to transform into a profound process of healing and inner rebirth. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. Link is in the pinned comment. There is a point within the grieving process where the pain begins to change form. It does not disappear, and perhaps it will never completely vanish, but it transforms. At first, it is raw, cutting, a weight in the chest that is hard to name. Over time, if you do not run away from it, if you allow yourself to feel it to the end, it begins to make space. And in that space, something new starts to emerge. Carl Jung saw this moment as the beginning of a psychic rebirth. It is not a return to normalcy, but the emergence of a new way of being in the world. More conscious, more rooted, more true. Grief has the capacity to completely dismantle our sense of identity. Who are we when that person is no longer here? What part of our story was lost with them? And what other parts, until now dormant, are being called to emerge? Jung believed that this identity collapse, as painful as it may be, was also a necessary movement. Loss forces us to abandon rigid identities, illusions of permanence and control. And it is precisely there that individuation can begin, when we stop seeking outside what can now only be rebuilt from within. In his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung movingly shares the impact of his wife Emma's death. It was not just memories or longing, it was inner transformations. He began to dream of her frequently, but not as she was in life. She appeared as a symbol, as a guide, as an archetypal presence that pushed him toward deeper dimensions of himself. Jung did not flee from the pain. He listened to it. He felt it. And more importantly, he allowed it to transform him. This psychic rebirth doesn't have a fixed script. For some, it emerges as a reconnection with the sacred. For others, as a change in life purpose. Some begin to write, to create, to help others. Some discover a strength they never imagined they possessed. What matters is not the what, but the how. Rebirth is not the denial of pain, but its assimilation. It is when we can carry the absence as a symbolic presence. When memory ceases to be an open wound and becomes fertile ground for new existential roots. But this transformation is only possible if there is surrender, not to passive resignation, but to the lived experience of suffering. The psyche, when respected in its language and time, reorganizes itself. It finds new ways to give meaning to life and death. The ego does not understand this immediately. It wants answers, dates, guarantees. But the soul works at a different pace, a pace that demands silence, listening, and courage to rebuild from what has been lost. And it is at this point that many people wonder, how can I help someone who is going through this process? How can I be present without invading? How can I offer support without trying to fix the other person's pain? In the next and final part, we will talk about this. How to truly stand by someone who is navigating grief, without judgment, without haste, and with the listening that the soul requires. Crossing grief is, above all, a solitary journey. No matter how surrounded we are by people, advice, messages of support, and words of comfort, the truth is that no one can feel for you. No one can descend into the depths of your soul and walk with your feet. But that doesn't mean we can't be there for each other. There is a presence that doesn't need words, a listening ear that doesn't seek to solve, only to embrace. And often, that is all someone in grief needs. Someone who has the courage to stay there, in silence, without trying to erase the pain, just to acknowledge it. Jung said that healing is only possible when the soul is heard. And listening to another's soul requires more than superficial empathy. It requires real presence. It requires you to set aside the impulse to fix the suffering, and instead offer space for it to exist. Don't say, "It will pass," because it may not. Don't say, "Everything happens for a reason," because there are pains that cannot be explained, only traversed. Say, "I am here." Say, "I don't know what to say, but I want to listen to you." Say, "Tell me what hurts." That is enough. That often is everything. And if you are the one going through this process, know that your pain is not weakness. It is a right, a psychic baptism that separates you from the life you knew and places you before the chance to be born anew, with more depth, with more truth, with more connection to what really matters. The pain is not destroying you, it is revealing you. So don't rush, don't try to go back to who you were. That you is gone with the loss. But there is a new you being gestated in the womb of darkness. One that may see the world with different eyes. One that may become more compassionate, more sensitive, more whole. Not because you have overcome the pain, but because you have learned to walk with it. If this video spoke to you, if it touched something inside, comment down below. Write about what you felt. Talk about who you lost, or about what this process has revealed about yourself. Sometimes, writing is also a form of healing. And your story can help someone who is reading and feeling alone. And if this content touched you, don't stop here. The next video is an essential continuation of this journey. It also talks about truths that need to be heard.